This is the Insider's Guide to Real Estate. I'm Victor Normand, your host, and today we talk about the kitchen. And here to guide us through the kitchen is my guest, Don Willis from Great Spaces in Boxborough. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell us a bit about Don Willis and how your background, how you got into kitchen and baths, and a little bit about your business, Great Spaces.
Sure. I actually started in engineering school, and my first main job out of college was working on the Big Dig. And
so that makes sense how that would segue right into kitchens and baths.
Exactly. It's just an easy transition. I ended up purchasing an older home in Boston during that time and just completely got bit by the bug. Mm-hmm. It felt a little bit more instantly gratifying to see a home transform into a new space as opposed to a highway get buried underground.
Right.
It seemed to be moving a lot quicker, and I got to really make an impact with every movement that every decision I made, and fell in love with it. I loved the feeling, the flow, the back and forth of the more remodeling and individual residential construction. So I ended up going back for some licensing and training classes and ended up working for a few smaller firms and eventually ended up purchasing my own firm about 6 years ago in Boxborough.
So you have a showroom in your offices in Boxborough?
I do. I have a showroom. We have cabinetry and countertops and hardware and tile and just about every finished material that you need to make it happen in sort of a comfy setting so that we can kind of handle everything soup to nuts.
So, it's a good business. You get to see the end product. Your creative efforts are rewarded in a lot less time than it took to plan and build the Big Dig.
Absolutely.
Let's just go back in time. Let's just talk about the kitchen in general. If you go back far enough, kitchens weren't even in the house. I toured Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, and the kitchen was a building outside behind the house. And it took a long time to bring the kitchens in the house, and even when they did, they were kind of hidden. So why were kitchens the bad boy of the house for so long?
Well, they were hot and stinky, and in different warmer parts of the country, like Mount Vernon, there were insects and rodents coming in trying to get your food, and that you definitely didn't want to have that in the home. And then I think turn of the century, food was supposed to materialize for your guests like magic. Mm-hmm. There wasn't supposed to be any sort of hard energy, effort, and sweat that went into it. Often people had people helping them prepare the food to put out there, so that was all supposed to be behind the scenes.
Sure. So it was a dangerous place. It was fire in the kitchen.
Sure.
Just starting with that. So what precipitated kind of bringing the kitchen in to the house? What made it smell better, or if you will, and be less dangerous?
Well, I think appliances for sure, and more modern appliances as opposed to open fires and fireplaces being what we were using for cooking. So we're encapsulating that heat so that you're not having that open flame.
So you mentioned to me that
real refrigerators instead of ice boxes, and yeah.
So you mentioned to me that in the 18th century, the second leading cause of death among women was getting their clothes caught on fire, and often that would happen in the kitchen. So not very good. So that's kind of, so now we have kitchens in our homes, and they're a big part of our homes, if not the center of our homes, and we'll get to talk about that in a bit, about how they have evolved. But one of the things that everyone is very much aware of now in the real estate business, if you're selling your home, the people are going to be concerned with the location of your home, but very quickly they're going to be looking at the kitchen. So if I'm going to sell my home, mm-hmm. and my kitchen was new in 1987, and it still works, but it's pretty dated, and I call you up and I say, Don, I want to do something. What should I do to improve this kitchen so I can make it easier to sell my house?
Sure. I think it's very individual. So I think that each space sort of functions a little differently. There's not one catch-all answer of replace your countertops, replace your appliances. I think it's going to be sort of the situation of your home, and a big component is how much light you get into your space so that it feels really good when you come in and feels inviting. So I think it's, for me, I always volunteer to come out for a free consultation, and I really feel that the least amount of stress and money that you put into the process when you're going to sell, which is a stressful process, is kind of the goal that the home seller wants, and that's what I want for them. So usually we try to take a look at the space and see if there's a way to lighten, brighten, streamline the space for people that are coming in. And I think a great tool that we have right now is to be able to do CAD, so that computer-aided drafting that you see on HGTV, where you can do 3D color pictures. We do a lot of that when homes are going to sell and they have slightly dated spaces, and we want people to be able to envision themselves in the space.
Sure.
So we end up doing a lot of pictures and putting them up.
So
for the
that's
open
good.
houses.
But there's a danger if you actually want to change some things, whether it's
Might not.
cabinets, countertops, flooring. There's a danger that my taste as the homeowner may not be
Exactly.
the taste of whomever I'm trying to sell the house to.
Exactly.
So how do I? Is there a balance? Is there some kind of a neutral palette that works in that case?
Well, for the past 18 years that I've been doing kitchens, it seems like the #1 choice of kitchen cabinetry has been white, consistently all the way through. So even if that's not what you would have chosen, white is definitely a pleaser, and I think a lot of that is the light factor. I think that it brightens the space up, and so it makes it feel inviting. It makes it feel more open and bigger. I don't know if I would suggest, if you're immediately selling and you're not actually going to get any benefit from the remodel, to go out and rip all your cabinets out and replace them as white, and because that would then, you would need new countertops and you would need new plumbing, and it becomes a domino effect of what you're putting into it. But I do think that there are local painters that could take off and spray your doors and give you a little facelift to make things feel brighter. And that's a quick, easy fix without having to delve into a lot of other specialties.
Sure. I could see where painting is relatively inexpensive, whether it's just the room itself, cleaning things up.
Sure.
Bringing more light into the room, again, it may or may not be all that inexpensive, but that's going to appeal to everyone who buys the house. But
It's very value
certainly,
added. Yeah.
Certainly anyone who's shopped for granite knows the variety, and some of the patterns are pretty extreme, and I think
Sure.
you need, you may fall in love with something that a potential buyer could find a showstopper and not go forward with the purchase. So you do need to be careful.
Absolutely.
So-
Yeah, it's very personal.
It is. Okay, so now, as we talk and I say, okay, well, Dawn, I am going to sell my house, but I'm thinking it may not be for 10 years or so. So what's the planning process? Where do you start? Do you start with cabinets, with the floor, or where do I start to plan a kitchen redesign?
I think that's a great question, and actually I treat that totally, completely differently. I think if you're going to enjoy that space for 10 years, that's when we start looking at what's going to be sort of what are going to be choices that you enjoy, but that won't offend most people, that most people feel good about when they walk into your space. And that is picking a lot of the neutral things and making the personal stuff, things that come with you, things that go on shelves and whatnot. But usually the way that I start a design is I get a wish list from the homeowner. There's a lot of tools out there right now. There's a website called House, which is similar to a Pinterest, but just for the remodeling home industry. Mm-hmm. And I let people I ask people to put together idea books so that you can really get a feeling for what their ideas of their space are going to be, and their expectations for it, and the things that they'd like to see in it. And then I utilize sort of what's at my avail to make that space feel user-friendly for anybody that would be purchasing.
Sure.
Come up with a way to pull in their personal tastes, but in a way that might be removable or changeable or updatable in 10 years.
Okay, so it seems like you would be doing two things. One, you'd take their wish list and organize it in terms of, all right, if these are the components that you would like, first we select this, and then that leads to selecting So what would it be? Do you think it's cabinets first, or countertops first, or flooring, or is there one?
Everybody's different.
Really? So
Everybody's
anything can
different.
be the focus of a kitchen?
Well, I think that they all have to be team players that work together. So everything has to play well together and everything's equally important. But I think that when a homeowner comes into me, their key thing that excites them, that got them to do it, is different. It might be a functionality standpoint. Somebody might come in and say, I'm a really good cook and I really need to have a double oven. I need to have a large range top. I need to have professional level appliances. That's what's going to make me excited. And they're not worried about the cabinets. But somebody else might come in and say, I hardly ever use my kitchen for cooking, but I want it to feel good. It feels so dark, and I want it to be bright and light, and we need to get rid of these 1970s dark cabinets, and they need to feel good when I walk into my space.
Okay, so someone may come in and be really focused on the functionality of a kitchen, and then turn to you and say, this is the kind of stove and refrigerator and appliances I want, and this is the kind of workspace I need. You tell me
exactly
what looks good, and we'll go from there.
Sure, because we could design your space completely on our own, usually in 2 or 3 different ways.
Yeah.
But bringing you along for the ride is what ensures that we're getting exactly the final space that functions for you.
All right, so you've worked with your client, and you've got everything they like in the kitchen, and you've kind of organized it and developed a path forward. But then budget comes into play, and there has to be priorities. So what are the obviously you have to have a stove and a refrigerator and a kitchen sink, but even saying that, I'm sure I know there are grades
Sure.
of that. So what kinds of tools do you have to help people work through a budget that might be a little tight for what they want to do?
Absolutely. We're extremely budget conscious, and I feel like to put all that effort in and then have it not be able to be something that can come to fruition would be a shame. And so we end up pretty early on in the process, we discuss the different choices and the different functionalities and how they might be more or less costly as we're designing it, but we're also matching the design with what I call a schedule of values. So it's basically a spreadsheet that breaks down all the materials that go into your space, and we simultaneously populate the design and that spreadsheet so that you can see allowances for what a standard item would go for. And when you're making choices and looking at pretty pictures, I let people know whether those are higher or lower than that standard allowance. So from the beginning, they're getting a good feeling of what the size of their space would take to fill and what the budget would be.
What about these very high-end appliances? I mean, very impressive when you walk into somebody's kitchen and you see these refrigerators and stoves that are very high-end. Are they really worth putting that in for the average homeowner? I know that's a tough question, but in your experience?
No, well, it's funny. My personal experience is very mixed on that. I feel there's 2 pieces to it. If you walk into a home to purchase and you see extremely high-end appliances, doesn't it give you a feeling that the rest of the home, that they didn't scrimp at all, that they didn't cut any corners, and that they put the best of everything in? I think that it definitely gives a nice sort of instant impression that things were done well and they were done higher end, and that it's definitely not a builder special, and that people took care for that home. So I do think that there is some instant value in that, but I certainly wouldn't jump to double the price of what a typical mid-level appliance is if you're not going to be getting some value out of it yourself. I wouldn't do it specifically for the resale. I would do it because you're going to be there for a little bit and you would actually utilize and enjoy those.
So what's the criteria for these high-end appliances? That they're used often, or they last longer? What is it about them besides the badge on them that makes them so expensive?
They're supposed to, especially the cooking products, they're supposed to regulate their temp better and be able to give you a more even result every time. So makes those of us amongst us that are not the best cooks, and levels the playing field.
Yeah, you're right, though. It does create a very positive first impression, and you might incorrectly make some assumptions about the quality of the cabinets, for instance.
Sure.
And there's some truth to it. Who would spend that much money on high-end appliances and not tried to get a good quality cabinet. Let's just briefly talk about countertops. And granite, stainless steel appliances and granite countertops seem to be the standard now, but is that changing at all?
Absolutely. Everything changes. Everything feels done, and everybody wants something fresh from time to time. And the past couple of years, people have strongly been looking at engineered products. So they also call it quartz stone. I like to call it engineered across the board because there's different levels of the
What does engineered
materials
mean
put into it.
with respect
So it's crushed up quartz, which is like a 7 on the hardness scale, and they're adding their own cement fillers to it so that they can make it a consistent color and pattern. And so they'll either emulate stone, granite, they'll emulate marble, or they'll do something completely solid to just be its own unique, durable, and kind of contemporary surface when they're doing the solid colors.
So with certain types of granite are more porous than others, and how does that compare to an engineered product? I mean, they do stain. It is possible to stain a stone countertop.
No one is going to say that you can't, because nobody wants to go on record to say that you can't, and of course you can. But the engineered stones are certainly a lot more durable on that. They're pounding out the porosity. They're taking out the air because they're making it, and they're able to make that tighter, and they're able to seal it in the factory.
All right, so stone is still the preferred countertop material, even though you can still buy Formica, and I was really impressed at the variety of Formica that's still available out there.
Yeah.
And appliances, stainless steel. I mean, do you see avocado appliances coming back anytime soon?
Actually, everything takes a turn. There are colored appliances. People are jumping into retro, especially for second homes. They're doing a lot of the fun retro stuff, like the reds and the crank open refrigerators, or even just a faux facade that looks like it's a retro fridge or oven with the clock buried in the back. And there's actually 3 main lines that have been pushing that lately. Right. But what I've seen mostly happening recently actually is people are heading back to white again, which is full circle, but a higher gloss white and in a higher end product.
Okay.
So that it doesn't have that sort of grainy orange peel effect where dirt will get stuck in it and you see the effects of people using it every day. It has a little bit more of a shiny, glossy feeling.
So all this kind of goes to the desire of many homeowners to personalize that space and really want to do something different. Now, usually a kitchen remodeling project involves more than one family member. Sometimes several, sometimes often probably 2. That's a problem sometimes. Are you asked to be the referee in many cases? Or?
I'm often the mediator. I think that that's a huge part of what we do. If there is 2 or more people, there's going to be 2 or more opinions. And I think that people are commonly surprised that their opinions aren't closer together. That happens a lot, is that they come to the table with me and think that they're both going to present and want the exact same space, and that they've been speaking about it, and they realize not until they start touching and feeling the materials or looking at each other's inspirations that their ideas aren't exactly on the same page. But we've always been able to find a commonality. I think it's really important that everybody feels like it's theirs and one person isn't compromising too much.
So
it's a big process.
Sure, you've never had to abandon a project because there wasn't a meeting of the minds.
No, we've never had to abandon.
All right, now let's talk about the concept now, which goes to individualizing the space, and they're calling it the transitional kitchen. And I'm not really sure if transitioning from the Mount Vernon to the open concept. I mean, anyone who goes to House or any of the shows on cable that talk about remodeling a kitchen, almost invariably they're taking down a wall.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Is that ever not advisable, or what's your experience?
Well, absolutely. Budget-wise, there are many times that it's not advisable to take down a wall, and I think that there is certainly sort of a gut feeling and a personal feeling about a space that many people are used to and enjoy the closer spaces, and that's what they've had, and that they don't want to see that change. But we are more often than not integrating the spaces. And I think that's because, I mean, it's been said many times before that the kitchen's the heart of the home, but I really truly feel it is the center. It's where working outside the home, many people, both partners are working outside the home. By the time you get home, that's where you're having your interaction while you're
Sure.
preparing dinner, and you want to all be part of that space. So I frequently am finding that we're eliminating the eating kitchen space, the eating kitchen table, and we're opening the wall to utilize the previously formal dining room as the more casual space, and then potentially adding bar seating for breakfast and smaller groups.
We're taking that, you mentioned integrating, so we're taking the kitchen, opening a wall perhaps, and making it connected to other parts of the house. And
Sure.
we're again, the transition from when it was hidden in the back of the house, and now it's very prominent.
Yeah.
And anyone who been to a house party, often people congregate in the kitchen, whether
Sure.
I've been known to move the hors d'oeuvres and the bar to the opposite end of the house to get people away from the kitchen, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's things going on in the kitchen, and it just seems like a natural place for people to get together, which I find curious because I remember my mother commenting she spends all her time in the kitchen, and it seemed to be the goal going back a few decades that we're going to make life easier, and we're going to introduce time-saving appliances and things in the kitchen, things like dishwashers. And I remember one Christmas I bought my mother an electric can opener. All idea of her having to spend, and it was my mother, spend less time in the kitchen. But now it seems like we've given up on that and said, okay, let's join the kitchen to the rest of the house.
Well, look how many cooking shows are on TV right now. I think that people are enjoying the process again. I think that many things have changed. It's not just the kitchen, the way we put it as part of our life. I actually think that the cooking and the way that we look at food, and there are many different things that have changed that have made that transition happen. So absolutely, I think that family, they want to have that quality time together as much as possible, so they are spending that time together and opening the walls to sitting areas and dining areas, and bringing desks into the kitchen, and bringing computers into the kitchen and TVs into the kitchen. And I think that as many activities that can be done together as opposed to sort of out of sight of each other is important. But I also think that certainly in the last decade there's a new cooking show every week, that people are really paying attention to what's going into their bodies and how it's being prepared, and enjoying the process and getting enjoyment out of it as opposed to feeling like a labor.
Sure. So you mentioned computers and TVs, what are some of the other things that are being transitioned, if you will, into the kitchen space?
I think that certainly it's a lay-down area. Many people are not making it to a separate office, so charging stations, USB plugs, just about everything that you do in your home from the time that you get home on a typical day until you go to sleep is you're going to find somewhere in that space, or it's not uncommon to find areas for that. So the computer setup, I put a file drawer in many kitchen spaces so that people can be tracking the things, the mail that needs to go in and out, the children's paperwork that needs to go in and out, even just the menus that you're ordering. But why have that somewhere away that you'd have to go to and then bring it back and remember it's there if this is where you're spending most of your time and your space? Okay.
So homework, allowing
Sure.
kids to do their homework in the kitchen. What pets are integral to
Sure.
to our family, so they shouldn't be excluded? What kinds of things have you done to accommodate a family pet in the kitchen?
Oh, absolutely. I think pets are crucial on so many jobs that we do, and they are definitely a big member of the household. We find places to accommodate their dishes, whether it be sort of tucked underneath the space and brought out at certain times of day, certainly to store their food. Larger dogs come with larger bags of food, and we put that in an airtight container tucked inside of a a cabinet, maybe the size of a trash bin with a lid so that it has a home and easy access point. They almost always get their own little spot for their
Right.
for their needs. Definitely, a lot of mud rooms, which are very much a continuation of the kitchen these days as well. We're putting in little stations to wash and rinse the dog and put a drain in. So that's been
No end to
been
it.
fun. There is no end to
So
it.
now the kitchen sounds to be a very active place. We've got pets and adults and kids. When you're designing the kitchen, it's got to function as well. So if there are two people in the kitchen preparing food, how do you design that so they work comfortably and they're not interfering with one another? What are some of the things that
Sure.
that I might not think of, but I should take advantage of if I'm remodeling my kitchen?
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is to bring in a professional designer.
Okay.
It's not just for people with large budgets, it's for everybody. It really makes it a cost-effective process because things are thought about.
Sure, you don't want to get to the end of the project and say,
realize.
"Well, I wish we had
Sure.
created a workspace over here."
Exactly. I think that there are set guidelines for how much room is comfortable to have more than one cook. Usually we like to have 42 inches for one and 45 to 48 inches of space between, say, an island and a back countertop.
Okay.
When you're going to have two people in the same space. You want to make sure major appliances, are not opposite each other or opening in the same area. You have to think of the flow of the kitchen. I always like for me, my husband does a lot of the cooking. I basically make my own coffee and have a few key things that I need to function immediately in the morning. And so I make sure that that's on the peripheral. And that same thing for my children. We personally have a small beverage fridge where I pull the snacks and the things that they need in the morning, and the coffee is over there. So we can all kind of get what we need towards the end of the space and not be in the main working space where the chef of the space might be, so that they have that freedom to walk back and forth and
So
make things fantastic.
early on in the design process, you have to try to get an understand
Interview.
how the family,
Sure.
who does the cooking,
Yes.
how the family operates, and try to incorporate that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm never going to create a poor design simply because the people of the house say that they don't cook. But everything should be catered towards exactly the way that the people that are using the home.
So
need
anyone
it.
who's done a kitchen remodeling job knows it's a big undertaking, and there are things that come to bear that you might not think of, things that are behind the walls, plumbing, the electrical codes that have changed. So how does that impact the process besides the cost?
Well, I think timing. Cost is probably the biggest thing that gets impacted with the code changes, unfortunately, but they're put in place for our safety because there's been issues that have warranted it happening. There's been a lot of electrical code changes in the last couple of years that have made some huge cost differences. But again, hiring a professional, somebody who understands the process, and not somebody who just does the beginning, middle, or end. Even if you don't utilize that person to manage the process all the way through, you want to be somebody who understands it. If you're with somebody who understands the middle and the end process, then they can think of those pitfalls before you get there and make sure the time is in. Let you know when walls need to be open when you didn't think they needed to be, or ceilings need to be opened, and who needs to come in before another.
So life is complicated, and things we do are more complicated now, and kitchen remodeling projects are no exception.
Yes.
So, Dawn, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for coming by, and thanks
you.
for watching.